Why does a free, independent press matter? This week, we'll shine the spotlight on press freedom. We'll show you where and why it's becoming harder for journalists to do their jobs. Also, killings, kidnappings, death threats and disinformation. Just some of the dangers reporters face in Africa's Sahel region. My special guest this week is Senegalese journalist Sadibou Marong from Reporters Without Borders. He'll tell us what it is like to be a journalist in the Sahel. Straight Talk Africa starts now. It's becoming more difficult throughout Africa and around the world for journalists to do their work. And that means it is more difficult for the public and government officials to know what's really happening around them. Major and radical changes linked to political, social, and technological upheavals are making matters worse. These are just some of the findings of the 2023 World Press Freedom Index. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk Africa. I'm Haydé Adams. As we mark World Press Freedom Day, we'll dig deeper into what it takes for the news media to fulfill their role in society. And here to discuss this with me are VOA's Press Freedom editor, Jessica Jerreat. She joins us from VOA Studios in New York. And Salim Solomon. She's a senior editor in VOA's Africa News division. Jessica and Salim, a warm welcome to you both. And Jessica, I want to start out with you. And I just want to pull up what the map looks like, because I want to get to what the state of press freedom looks like in the world. And this map, which of course was published by Reporters Without Borders, gives us an idea of what press freedom looks like around the world. Now, the redder the area there, of course, the more serious the situation for journalists to do their work freely. And the countries in green, very few there, represent a good situation in terms of a free press. And yellow, like you'll see in countries like the United States, South Africa and Namibia, their conditions are regarded as satisfactory. Now, Jessica, what does this map tell you? Because it tells me that you have your work cut out for you, but what does this map tell you about where press freedom is really most under threat?
I think you're right there, Haydé, and thank you so much for having me on today on World Press Freedom Day. The situation for media freedom is becoming more dire. We're seeing from that map that you just showed there that 7 out of 10 countries, the situation for media, the ability of journalists to just do their job and to go out and be a public watchdog, is now threatened in 7 out of 10 countries. As you say, there is some green on the map, but this year there are only 8 countries that the Reporters Without Borders say have a good or foster a positive environment for the media. A lot of that is to do with economics or the rise of disinformation, technology, and a more polarized situation for media at the moment. But at the end of the day, the main issue here is that audiences are losing out on the ability to access information that they should be able to have access to.
Salim, I want to take you to the map of our coverage area, which is, of course, the African continent. When you look at this map, which countries are doing worse? Which countries have more improved situations for the news media? What do you read into this map?
Unfortunately, my home country ranks, one of the bad performers on that chart that you saw. But it looks as if it's moved a little bit, not because things have changed, but things have remained static. So a lot of the red countries, like including China, and you see Iran, most Asian countries at the bottom, is because a violent crackdown has increased. They're actively, violently cracking on the press. But countries like Eritrea, for instance, there hasn't been a independent press to crack down on.
So just because Eritrea has moved up doesn't necessarily mean conditions there have improved?
No, and unfortunately also overall on the continent has seen the biggest drop this year, even in places where there's some sort of healthy environment for the press, like Senegal, for instance. There's been a lot of political tension in connection with its term limits, debate about politics, and so there's been a crackdown on reporters, intimidation, attack, and so that's what you see. And in Eritrean case, because the factors include economic factors, for instance, there's no public record to measure or have some sort of understanding of where, data on the country. And so that's part of the reason you see static, non-movement in terms of press freedom. That's why it looks as if it moved. It's because there's no independent press.
Right, and Jessica, to that point, I mean, many of these countries that find themselves far lower on the index are countries where, you know, they're kind of the usual suspects. But has anything significant changed in recent years in terms of the reporting conditions for journalists? Because the Press Freedom Index talks about major and radical changes that are affecting the working conditions for journalists. What has changed in recent years?
I think one of the biggest changes is the rise and the speed at which disinformation can affect and disrupt credible media. We're particularly seeing that with Russia moving with its war in Ukraine. A lot of people talk about that war being fought on two fronts. There's the physical battleground, but there's also this separate fight for disinformation, for access to news. And that can spread even as far as Cuba. A Ukrainian group called Stop Fake, they try to dispel the worst of Kremlin propaganda. They recently teamed up with journalists in Cuba, another country that has very limited or just one of the most censored countries in the world. So we have Ukrainian fact checkers teaming up with the few independent journalists who try to get information into Cuba, just to try to stop some of this disinformation coming from Russia, where they try to dismiss or disrupt the information about what they're doing in Ukraine and try to justify it. We also see another sort of stalwart on the list, China, doing the same sort of propaganda tactics of spreading disinformation. When you add into that the economic pressures, where we're seeing news deserts, media black holes, where because of economics, particularly still coming out of the pandemic, where the media business took a big hit, there's just this ripe environment combined with technology for disinformation to really spread and start to sort of turn the conversation. You know, here at VOA, where we're just so committed to credible news and credible and accurate information, it's a very worrying trend to see just how quickly technology can make the spread of false information spread so quickly.
Jessica, what constitutes the news media today? What makes a journalist? Anyone with a camera, anyone with a social media platform with enough followers to get people's attention, bloggers, political commentators, and also just because there is a free press, does that guarantee that the truth will win out? Because what we find these days is, you know, false information is readily available, it's free and it's everywhere, whereas you hit a paywall the minute you want to click on the truth. I mean, there are all these factors, but what makes for a free press and what makes for a journalist these days?
Those are some really good questions. I think the first question, particularly to speak about who is a journalist today, I think it's better to actually reframe that as what constitutes good journalism. Because in some countries where there's a more positive environment for the media, yes, we have established journalists who have ethical guidelines, strong sort of framing and groundwork in providing accurate and fair, balanced news. But if you look at Vietnam, which this year took a big decline on the Reporters Without Borders rankings, it's now the third worst country in the world for press freedom. There is no independent press there, so all you have is the man or woman in the street armed with their smartphone and social media access, who are using those platforms to try to report and fill in those gaps that are missing from maybe mainstream media. In terms of sort of supporting press freedom, there is some, I mean, there are big problems facing the media, and that's eroding trust and causing problems for just being able to have more information out there. But there are efforts being made at the UNESCO conference this year, which marked the 30th anniversary of press freedom here in New York. There were some really interesting ideas and platforms being put forward, including a multi-million-dollar public fund to provide grants to help some of these community radio stations and local news outlets to try to re-establish themselves and to sort of get back into the game and be able to just do their job even in really threatening environments.
Jessica, Jerreat, thank you so much for being with us. I wish we had some more time, but it was great to hear your insights there. Jessica Jerreat is VOA's Press Freedom Editor. Thank you so much for joining us from New York. Salim Solomon, I'm going to ask you to stay with us. I've got a few questions for you, because we're going to turn our attention to artificial intelligence and the threat that it poses to journalism, especially in Africa. Ignatius Annor is here with us with more.
Hi, Haydé. Thank you very much. Now, have you viewed an online news report, believed it, only to learn later that it was fake? Advancement in artificial intelligence are now making that possible. Look at this photo. This image shows a fictitious skirmish with former US President Donald Trump and New York City police officers when he was first arraigned before a state court last month. This artificial intelligence image was widely circulated during that arraignment. So is AI becoming an existential threat to journalists and journalism? Media analysts say emerging technology spaces are very likely to put the credibility of quality journalism to the test. The reliance on artificial intelligence in journalism is not new, but recent AI-powered tools empowering bots or a web robot, a software application that runs automated tasks over the internet, usually with the intent to imitate human activity to produce news content for the public's consumption, is raising eyebrows. Media analysts say determining fact, fiction or doctored images could further deepen trust issues. The Committee to Protect Journalists is concerned about the impact of AI on authentic journalism.
Yes, there are elements of AI and the way that AI is being used that is indeed a threat to journalists and to journalism. No doubt about it. And what we have seen is the use of artificial intelligence to what has been called the supercharging of disinformation, right? Where journalists can be targeted by sophisticated means that really looks as though it is perfectly plausible and believable, and that really puts them at risk.
The international non-profit and NGO Reporters Without Borders says AI tools are being used by unnamed sources to undermine journalists as they grapple with new media plurality.
At a certain point, it might be a kind of added value, but what we have seen and linking it to the propaganda machine and propaganda tool is some people are using artificial intelligence so as to jeopardize quality of journalism, journalists themselves, and also trying to undermine, the findings and revelations which some honest and professional journalists have done.
I see it kind of raising the standards and raising the bar for a lot of us as journalists to justify why we are journalists, and just to for our readers, our listeners, our viewers to really understand the value that we bring. Because ultimately people are always going to still want to have authentic news and authentic information and important analysis and, explaining the world in a way that only another human being can explain to human beings.
There's no data in Africa on the emergence of AI and its effects on the news industry. Quintal says the use of AI to propagate disinformation is seeing an uptick on the continent, but not without fierce resistance by those practicing true journalism.
So while it is a complex problem and the world is looking at how to combat disinformation in this sense, I think one of the important things is for journalists on the ground not to be used, not to be in a position where they are in fact propagating the very disinformation that is undermining their craft as journalists.
These technologies are not more powerful than us. We make them powerful. We give them the information. They're just more efficient. They're quicker. They're faster. But they can only do that with the information, the data that we give them to work with. And we shouldn't be afraid of them. We should learn how to use them to our advantage and to make what we do much better, much more useful.
Well, great reporting there. Thank you so much, Ignatius Annor. And Salim, as we just saw in that piece there, we heard that this is not something to fear. This is something that, only has the power that we give it. However, how can artificial intelligence help or hurt journalism? Because this is a double-edged sword, right?
Right, and it's very complex because the threat of AI, I'd like to tackle this question by asking a question: a threat to whom? Because if bad actors use AI for disinformation, it could really create an atmosphere of doubt. For instance, I just want to show you a clip here we have of some videos. Technologically generated using AI, people that are spreading information based on political environment that exists. There's one example in Burkina Faso, if we could play that for a little bit, just so you could see. People, you could see the videos that look real, talking about who to support in political tensions. And we haven't independently verified the video, but
just to give us some idea. Because these things look very real.
They look very real.
Completely believable. But they are telltale signs, though.
They're very telltale signs. And the problem with these videos is that it really creates, you can't discern the truth from fake news.
Okay. Let's take a listen quickly.
Let's take a listen.
Hello to the African people, and particularly to the Burkina people.
We are Americans from Africa, and we are Pan-Africanist.
We appeal to the solidarity of the African people and the people of Burkina Faso to effectively support the authorities of the transition.
Okay, you saw there. And so this is a message. These are videos, technologically created AI videos that purport to present themselves as Americans supporting a coup d'etat in Burkina Faso. So some observers say, notorious disinformation campaigns by Russian-supported disinformation campaign in these countries are responsible for this. As I said, we haven't independently verified these videos, or we don't know who is behind these videos.
But Salim, are these easy to create?
Very easy. It takes a couple, and it's free, which is also another danger. But for us as journalists, what makes videos like this very difficult is that we are having additional layers to verify, especially in countries where there's conflict, where there's coup d'etat, as you saw, in places like Burkina Faso. We've seen similar videos in French purporting to be news anchors when they're not. These are all AI-generated people, broadcasting disinformation, made-up stories. And so that's the difficulty when media outlets heavily rely on videos that are submitted by citizens, collected by citizens, or using different tools. When you don't have reporters on the ground to witness these events, it becomes more difficult to verify information, to know what is true and what is not true, because there are a lot of actors that are there to disinform and disrupt the truth ecosystem. So democracy is at stake here, freedom of press is at stake here.
Making our jobs as journalists even harder. Of course, look at the time it took us to try and verify this. You need a lot of resources, you need a lot of time and attention to actually do that, and to keep doing good journalism, as Jessica mentioned earlier. Salim Solomon, this is all very fascinating. Thank you so much. We'll have you back, of course, on a number of other issues, but thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Well, after the break, what is it like to be a reporter in Africa's Sahel region? My guest is Sadibou Marong from Reporters Without Borders in West Africa. He's standing by, and we'll hear from him when Straight Talk Africa returns.
In times of change, when the world seems uncertain, and what we hear doesn't reflect what we see, we seek the truth. When we are told only part of the story, we lose trust. In moments of crisis, our dreams, hopes, and wishes for a better tomorrow depend on a free press. At Voice of America, we bring you the stories that people take risks to see. We connect the world and unite it with truth. At Voice of America, we show you the whole picture.
You're with Straight Talk Africa. Welcome back. There are fears that some parts of Africa's Sahel region have become no-go zones for journalists. A new report by the advocacy group Reporters Without Borders reveals the daily dangers faced by journalists in the region, ranging from killings and kidnappings to death threats and disinformation campaigns. The report, titled "What It's Like to Be a Journalist in the Sahel," also recommends ways these challenges can be overcome. And my guest today is Senegalese journalist Sadibou Marong. He's the West Africa Director of Reporters Without Borders. Sadibou, what a great pleasure to have you here with us on Straight Talk Africa. You are in high demand these days. A lot of people want to talk to you and hear about some of the work that you have been doing. And, you know, I found this investigation into what journalists face in large parts of the Sahel very interesting and very revealing. And, you know, you say that there are large parts of Mali that are now on no man's land for journalists. What are these dangers and the threats that you talk about? For those of us who don't know how severe and intense conditions are, can you give us some insight?
Thank you, Haydé. In fact, when you take the whole environment like Mali, Burkina Faso, and even some part of Niger, I mean, the situation is that, I mean, the northern parts are now controlled by armed terrorist group, and in those northern parts, the security forces and the army, they are trying to fight back those armed security groups. And in between, there is information, there is news, and those who are providing news are journalists. And journalists, in their attempt to go and report independently the information for the public, for the wider public, on behalf of the right to information of the public, they are most of the time either kidnapped, for example, by the armed group, because they become a very good target for the armed terrorists. We have seen the case of French journalist Olivier Dubois, who hopefully has been released, or they are trying to, we have actually, for example, in Mali, two local journalists, until now, since 2020 and 2021, they went missing. No one knows where they are, and they have been kidnapped by armed group. And this is the situation. And in the fight back, armies and security forces, they are doing also a lot of human rights violations. While they are doing human rights violation indiscriminately, for example, killing youngsters, killing women, killing elderly peoples, they don't want journalists to report independently on that. And those who are daring to report independently on those, and they are, as most of the time, either arrested, they are expelled, and they are also persecuted. And in the capital city, for example, which are more or less safer zone for reporting, what they do, for example, in Mali and Burkina Faso, which are countries ruled by military juntas, for example, they don't want most of journalists, to reveal some truths, to reveal some information. That is not something acceptable. That is why we have decided to go and investigate, so as to see the day-to-day work of journalists in those countries, how it's like to be a journalist in it. It's a danger, because you are kept, as a journalist, you are kept between armed groups, and most of the time also military injunctions, what they call injunctions, and arrests, persecutions. It is also kidnapping. Most of the time you might be kidnapped, like the two I described earlier, and the former one who is now hopefully free. You can also be, they also can even put in, set up some law, which are, press freedom killing law, for example. You say, okay, by some time, it's not allowed, for example, to cover this, to cover X, Y, or Z. They also can ask journalists to not go to some independently, for example, to some remote areas, for example, because of the what they call état d'urgence, for example, in the case of Burkina Faso. All this side is problematic, and finally, what we see is what we are seeing is the development of a new news zone, which is only in capital cities. That is something we have seen only in capital cities. The other thing also is in those remote areas, for example, there is in West Africa most of the time the development of a lot of community radios. Those community radios using local language, and sometimes even also serving as a kind of antenna for international news broadcasters, like either VOA in French or in local languages, for example, so as to spread the news further, far and wide. Some of them have been told, or for example, has been banned, for example, from independently reporting some information. We have received a lot of testimonies, for example, of journalists who were there, and they told us, I mean, when the armed group came, they asked us, okay, they told us, okay, you have to broadcast music. No, you don't have to broadcast music. You have to broadcast the preaches, I mean, things like that. If you are if you are daring to broadcast other than what they want, they will come in the night and attack the radios and attack your equipment. This is problematic.
And added to that, and very briefly here, added to that, they also have to contend to new actors like the Wagner Group. Yes. This is something else that I saw in the report.
Yeah. I mean, this is also the control of the narrative of the riposte or of the fight back, while controlling the narrative. What we have seen emerging really with a lot of examples. I mean, some local media are more or less afraid to report independently on some abuses done by Wagner peoples, because even officially those Wagners are not considered as mercenaries. They are considered as the official speech is the Wagners, our partners, our Russian partners. But in behind, you will see them, they have also been doing a lot of human rights violations. And all those human rights violations, you need to be very courageous as a journalist. You need to be very independent. You need to be very perspicacious as a journalist to go and reveal them and put them up front for the people, for the wider people to know.
I want to ask you, Sadibou, we see today the economic, and as you spoke about, the political pressures, but we also see the economic pressures that the media is under these days. What is it like in these conditions to maintain a free press?
It is quite difficult, for example, in those areas. For so long times, there have been a kind of subsidies, state subsidies going to the media at a wider scale. But now, because of the war, because of the fighting back of the armed troops, I mean, there are a lot of economical problems, and the media are left there as they own. What they do is try to develop some partnership at the very local level. For example, if you go to the remote areas with community radio, what they do, they can go with the Lord Mayor and develop small partnerships so as to maintain the functioning of the media. If you come to the cities, to the towns, you will see. I mean, the advertisement is getting very tiny, and the newspapers are not really well sold, and that is also problematic. I mean, this is developing, and the authorities there are aware of that. They know that. I mean, the media, in terms of economy, are not doing well, but they are also trying to play on that so as to keep on persecuting the kind of, okay, you need to be in accordance with what we want, and then we will be trying to support you. Yes.
Right,
yes,
that
yes,
give and take.
Yes.
But Sadibou Marong, thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much for coming here and giving us some insight into what it is like. And welcome to Washington. It's great to have you here, and great to have you here on The Voice of America. We're going to leave our show there. Sadibou Marong is the West Africa Director of Reporters Without Borders. It's such a great pleasure talking to you. Thank you for joining me. And that is where we will leave it for this week. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Don't forget that. And thank you for being with us. Until the next time, I'll see you then. Goodbye.